Well, thank you, Paula. I'll say it again. You've heard it before. It's good to be here with you to talk about what probably is a little bit of an enigmatic title. I mean, if we're quite honest, I do get comments from time to time about my titling of talks. Quite recently, I heard that, Tim, if it wasn't you, we would be asking to rewrite this title. Because the history of our future, I mean, come on. But we'll see if it makes any sense as we go along. One of the things that we are probably aware of about ourselves is that we are really, in many ways, future-oriented. It's just kind of a fact of our makeup. And you can look at it at a lot of different levels, but even if you just look at it, the biology of a human being, you speak in terms of the things that cause us to appear as we do, the sorts of capacities that we have, at least in physical terms, personality traits. A lot of it is dictated by our genetics. I mean, this is one of the things that is one of the hot topics these days about genetic engineering and the possibilities to influence, the expressions of our humanity through the genes that are turned on or turned off. But one of the facts of our makeup, of everybody's makeup, is that there are many, many genes that we have that are unexpressed. That for whatever the reasons are, those things that would make them active and make them express have not yet been activated. So at a genetic level, there's this whole range of possibilities that are as yet untapped and unrevealed. So something in the future, our genetic makeup speaks to that. For those of us who are involved in any sort of a spiritual path, and particularly something like the Theosophical Society, it has three objects, the Theosophical Society. The first and most important is this one about unity, or to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity. And I always come back, not to apologize for the language, but in the 1870s, when we spoke about the human family, the language that was used would have been brotherhood, which obviously includes sisters as well, but it's what we're stuck with. So that's the first object. The second speaks about this study, comparative study of religion, science, philosophy, these three principal avenues that we have for trying to understand and to explore this very elusive thing that we call truth. So that's the second object. The third object talks about the investigation of the unexplained laws in nature, and this part is the one that relates to this future orientation, and the powers latent within each and every human being. So there is this fundamental idea in this theosophical expression of this ageless wisdom that there are powers that are within each and every human being that are somehow sleeping, dormant, latent. And so these latent powers are one of the things that we focus on in terms of what is it that they are, to begin with, and then how is it that we can awaken them. So this is one of the things that speaks about the future. All of us are, in many ways, as much as we talk about be here now, live in the present moment, probably for most of us, the fact is that whatever is our spiritual practice, is largely focused on the unfoldment of something which does not yet exist. In the Buddhist tradition, there is this idea, there are a few ideas, but one of them would be that basically one of the things everybody experiences, one thing that's common to all, is the experience of suffering on many levels. But that one of the things that happens from that experience is that ultimately we get tired of it. Nobody really likes to be uncomfortable, to suffer, to experience pain, loss, all of the things that are just a part of coming into this world. And so there's the idea that eventually we come to the point where we say enough is enough. And then is when you start to turn toward these things like Theosophy, meditation, Buddhism, Christianity, religion, something that seems to point to an avenue through which we can minimally find relief. But along some of these paths, there is in fact the promise that they lead to something beyond just relief. That there is in fact the possibility of a state that's described as enlightenment or Christ consciousness or some sort of a spiritual realization. So that too is something that, oddly described, all of the great teachers in these various traditions, they would say that it's something that is present in its fullness within each and every one of us right now. So, in Buddhism, the idea that enlightenment in this very body, in this very life, is the possibility. And yet, our experience somehow doesn't always bear that out. If these great teachers are telling the truth, then why is it that I'm having all this trouble, And it's a valid question. So, in some sense, it's fully present, but in terms of our experience of it, it lies somewhere ahead. So that's the kind of arc of our discussion this evening. My dad lived to an age of 92 years old. That's a good old age. He did a lot of things during his life. When he was 91, some of you who have been out gardening here recently will understand this. When he was 91 years old, he was planting fruit trees. Now, you get that, right? 91 years old, you're planting fruit trees. There is no possibility you're going to pick an apple or a pear for at least the next 3 years. But, when he died, one of the things, you have to clean out all of the things when people pass. There's all sorts of things that they left, what they were reading last, their clothes. My dad, there was this stack of gardening, those manuals that they send you, the catalogs they send you during the winter. He would sit there and go through it to pick out, this year it's a pear tree, a whole stack of those we had. So his view of the future was one that you could describe perhaps as optimism. And this is the same man who would tell you that he's buying trees that will yield fruit in 3 or 4 years from now, but he would tell you, when you go to the grocery store, don't buy any green bananas, because I can't wait. I don't have time. I might be gone before they ripen. So it's this kind of odd combination of the ways in which we can and do see what lies ahead. Probably for us, there are a couple of different ways of looking at the future that are prevalent in our world today. I think most people have the feeling that ahead of us there is something great that lies ahead. We don't know quite how to describe it, But for many people, particularly today, there is this sense that somehow or another we are on the cusp of something great. And then it gets down to, what is our view of what that is? And I do believe that for many of us, it's almost inescapable today. It's almost impossible to be out of touch with the cycle of the news. And so we are very media connected. And so for someone whose regular diet of thought is what we see and what is projected to us from normal sorts of media sources, it's easy to develop a picture and a sense of what is the aspect of this great future that is ahead of us. For many people, I'm afraid the sense is that there are great calamities that lie ahead, that there is great suffering, perhaps, dis-ease, all of the different things that we see painted in our nightly news, in our daily diet of the nightly news cycle. Wars, earthquakes, tsunamis, starvation, use of strange means to harm each other all over the world. I find myself quoting this figure very often because it's almost unbelievable, except that it's true. And it is so utterly needless and ridiculous, but it's what we're doing. The idea that there are at any given moment in the world today about somewhere in the neighborhood of 50, 60 wars going on, where communities of people are in an organized sort of battle with one another around the world. And, that's an awful lot of dissension. But we see that. We're exposed to that. And very often, try as we might, we can't look the other way. And so, looking to the future, looking to what it is that lies ahead, it is completely understandable that one might view this future with a sense of trepidation, fear, perhaps. And not just the fear of the unknown, but the fear of the sad facts that we do, in fact, know. So that's one view. There is another view which I think is perhaps a minority view, but it is one which is largely the function of this sort of embrace of the teachings of the Ageless Wisdom, Theosophy being one of those streams. And it's put very well in the terms of a little book. I think I've probably even mentioned this book before because it's basically a storybook written by a lady by the name of Mabel Collins back at the end of the 19th century. Lovely little story about, it really talks about the degrading times of the ancient religion in in Egypt. It's called The Idol of the White Lotus. Lovely little short storybook. If you get a chance, pick it up, take a look at it. But part of the story, there is this one moment that occurs where this young boy who has been something of he's had something of an opening to a profound spirituality that then got misused in this wrong practice. But he has this awakening experience. And during that time, he is given these things that are called the three truths. And he's told, these three truths are eternal. But somehow or another, they become lost from view. Take them and use these to feed the people. So one of those truths is the one that focuses on this alternative view of a future possibility. because it speaks about, the quote is this, that the soul of man, so the soul of any human being, is immortal. And its future is the future of a thing whose growth and whose splendor has no limit. So the future of any breathing, living human being is without limit in terms of its growth, in terms of its splendor, regardless of the scene that seems to be painted in the outer world. And the reason why those are things that people can respond to is not just because it's said in some old book. I mean, for some, that's good enough. You know, somebody who has the sufficient label or credentials behind their name wrote it, somebody else approved its publication, somebody else sold it at a relatively high price. I bought it, it must be true. So, you know, there's this chain that leads to credibility. But that is not the reason why something like that has any traction or appeal. The fact of the matter is that as you hear that, and as you try and either think your way into it or experience the meaning of something like that, there's something within each and every one of us that responds to that. In a deep and an intuitive way, we are very much aware that this life, this body, this experience does not begin with birth, does not somehow end with the moment where breathing ceases. You know, very often if you were to ask someone, what is the opposite of birth? No, excuse me. I gave it away. Forget that I said anything. You have forgotten what I just said. What is the opposite of death? Generally, the knee-jerk response would be birth, life. Life and death, opposites. It's not, of course. The opposite of death is birth. Both of them are incidents in this ongoing cycle that we call life. And so we respond to that. We're aware of that. So Pythagoras, you know, probably he perplexed many of us in terms of geometry when we were in high school, but he wasn't just a mathematician, he was a wise man and quite a seer. Talking about consciousness, because really, when we speak, and perhaps particularly even more so when I'm speaking this evening, want to focus on what it is that we're really talking about here. And I talked about biology and about genetics keying certain things, but really, we're talking about consciousness. And I come to recognize that, over the years that I have been speaking, you pick a title, you pick a time. It's about a bunch of things, it would seem, but really it's only about one thing, and that's consciousness. So when we talk about consciousness, Pythagoras' contribution, one of them was, about how this consciousness unfolds. And he spoke about consciousness sleeps in the mineral. Consciousness is everything. So whether it's mineral, whatever form it expresses through, he was describing the way in which it expresses. Consciousness sleeps in the mineral, dreams in the plant, awakens in the animal, becomes aware of itself in the human being. This is this progression of unfoldment. In his saying, he didn't take the next step, which would talk about that state of being which lies beyond mere humanity. That's the range that very often we find in the spiritual writings and scriptures and the lives of beings who have been regarded as somehow illumined. They speak about that next category. And in terms of religion that most people in the West are most familiar with, which would be Christianity, you have these very clear, pointed statements about what that next step might look like in the unfoldment of consciousness. And the way it is expressed in one place is that during the life of Jesus, when he was doing the various things that he did, people marveled. There were a lot of different things that were definitely beyond the capacity of the average Joe in the street. Not too many of them were turning water into wine and all that sort of stuff. But his statement was, that the things that you see me doing, all of you will do greater things than this. It's just the nature of this process of unfoldment. Others have expressed it differently. In Buddhism, they talk about the Buddha nature, which is inherent in every being. But as it unfolds, the Buddha nature becomes the Buddha, the awakened one. And of course, many sorts of miraculous sorts of things become evident in these different people. Many of them historic, many of them legendary, but all of them point to one thing, that consciousness is in essence not only who we are, but consciousness is the nature of the reality that we unfold into in our understanding. So, probably most of you, if you've ever heard me get up here and talk before, you might be aware I have a fondness for stories. I like them. And I like them because in the spiritual traditions particularly, one of the primary ways, primary tools that is used in the attempt of people with great understanding to help to elevate us is the use of stories. You pick your storybook, and when I say storybook, you pick your religious scripture. They're all storybooks, and that's not demeaning in any sense. To my mind, it elevates it, because stories necessarily are derived from experience. Facts, information, you can get that anywhere. Anybody can give you facts about a whole variety of things, including Theosophy, including the spiritual life. And they are good things, they are necessary, but they are very, very small things. If you want to stick to the facts, you're not going too far. Again, it's necessary. We need some background, we need some exposure, but facts and information are the smallest things of all. And the fact about facts and information is information has no capacity for transformation. It doesn't work that way. We have the idea that if we learn a certain number of facts about any given thing, then at some point, if we have accumulated enough of these facts, then at some point we become wise. Why? Because we can quote, we can talk, we can express these facts. But somehow or another, they always fall short of experience. And the goal of the great teachers and the ones who are pointed to as great ones in humanity has always been not just to make you more factually rich, but to impart some sort of richness of experience. And so, the experience of many is in the presence of someone who is, in fact, rooted in these deeper levels of being. It's a lot like placing a bar of iron. You have a cold bar of iron, you put it next to a fire. That iron heats up. It starts to take on some of the qualities of that flame next to which you have put it. And so we find that that's our experience. When we find ourselves in the presence of those who are in some way connected, who have had this deepening experience and are able or attempting to communicate it. And one of the great ways that they do it is in these stories that they tell. And in terms of the great stories, there's a lot of things that speak to many levels of our being. But there are also these overarching great stories. Really, when you look at it, there's only one story that's being told. There's only one. It seems like they're different characters, they may be doing different things, but it's one story that is being told. And it is this story of consciousness, of its involvement in matter, of its awakening, and of its return to its pristine state. It's the one story. And pick one. Call it the story of the Mahabharata, the great epic poem from which the Bhagavad Gita is derived. It's the story of a family of really the gods incarnate who find themselves embodied, who find themselves involved in the whole troubles of the world, who find themselves in a war. War ends with all of the things that come with war. And then they find themselves in this arc that moves them heavenward. So it's the incarnation, all of the toils and troubles that come with this body and its repeated appearance, and then the unfoldment and the liberation. And that's the story of the Mahabharata, Ramayana, the Bible. Come on. The Son of God, born into the body of an infant, in a manger, where animals are fed. What more clear sort of symbolic representation that the Son of God, the divinity, comes in the midst of an animal nature and grows, expands, achieves its freedom from this form, in this case through a crucifixion, but nevertheless, freedom from, and then becomes unified, exalted. It's the one story that repeats itself over and over and over again. We miss it because we're trying to focus on the facts. Wait a minute. Historical records do not show that there was this man walking in Palestine at this time. So the whole superstructure of the teaching must be wrong. It's not factual. So you can stick with that if that does it for you. Stick with that and miss the meaning. Stick with that and miss the opportunity that these things are intended to provide to follow these stories, these great stories. I'm always using this analogy that it's a lot like a ladder where these stories lead you step by step by step up this ladder. But like any ladder, you reach a point where there's a last rung. And when that last rung is achieved, then you have the unenviable choice of having to step out where there is no visible rung, where there is no visible support. They talk about step out on faith. But step out, reach out, move out into that realm that has been attempted to be shown to us, and which we have probably had some profound experience of, just in terms of our own intuitive insights that necessarily come to each and every one of us. So we step out, and in that moment, then it becomes more than somebody leading you. Then it becomes more than somebody else's words. Then it becomes the experience that roots itself within us in a very permanent fashion. It's not something that leaves us with the departing of this body. It's something that continues. And so these are the stories. One story. Somehow or another, this idea came into my head. The story is something like this. We can imagine a drop of water somewhere in one of the oceans of the world. The sun's beating down, and it gets evaporated out from this all-encompassing ocean, goes up, and then somehow or another gets rained down to earth someplace. And so in describing the experience of this drop, it comes from an infinite unity with the waters of life, rises and falls to earth. As it falls to earth, it sinks in. For one drop, perhaps it finds its way to the root of a particular plant. And then the description of the life of this drop of water is a description of all of the experiences it counters in coursing through this plant. So this is the story that's told. Another one finds it to the tongue of an animal. And within that animal, a whole different level of experience is the experience of this drop of water. And at some point, wherever the drop may come from, it goes out as a drop of dew, or it comes out as something that comes out of the animal's body. It finds its way to the river. The river finds its way to the sea. And what began as the consciousness of the unity became the consciousness of the individual drop, became a host of experiences that maybe got repeated, now becomes something where it unites once more, bringing with it this wealth of experience that before it did not have. It's the one story. It's the history of our future. It's what's going on. And so we kind of root ourselves in this type of thinking, and from thought, it can develop to experience. So this is something I wanted to talk about. I also have to recognize something. That for me, I've been out here now as president of the TS for 6 years. Potentially it could go for 9, but that potential we're not going to do. So for me, actually this evening, this will be the last time I'll be addressing you as president of the American section. I'll still be president of the international, but so it causes me to think. During 6 years' time, I've come up here and I've talked about a whole variety of things. I think about some of the titles that I've been allowed to use, such things as the habit of dying, the value of nothing. I was trying to express something about interdependence and emptiness as a concept. So the value of nothing, it sounded good to me, but who knows what that means? And of course, tonight, the history of our future. But again, when I look at it, and I can afford myself some nostalgic moments, having been involved now, and something about it. When you come to the close of a period of activity, it's an excellent time to look back, to remember. Whether it's the close of something like this, or whether it's the close of a life. This is what we do. And really, for me, when I look at it, pretty much I've been talking about just one thing too. It looks different, but probably I've been talking about one thing. And that one thing, if I could describe it most aptly, it would probably be that what I have been pointing toward is a certain possibility for each of us. And it's one that we do avail ourselves of, but it's one that needs to become something of a continual quality of our being. If I had to describe it, it would be something like openness. To be the quality of being open. The quality of being free from the many barriers that we erect, that we accept, that close us in, that limit this potential which is right before us. But we don't get it, we don't see it, because we don't see past the wall. The idea was expressed in Shakespeare in Hamlet, where Hamlet had seen something that he couldn't understand. No, it was somebody had seen it before. And so what was said was that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of in your philosophy. We miss it. And we miss it because in many ways there are certain fixed ideas we have come to accept. Beyond even the fixed ideas, we have very fixed and hardened senses of who we are. Variety of identities that we inhabit. We're sort of like serial inhabitants of these various identities. We come to work, we're one person, we go home, we're another, we go to church, we're another. And all of these different things can be more of a limitation than a liberation. So, those are the things that we have to try and address. And it is addressed through a certain measure of informing ourselves, but more so it comes through a certain type of practice. Obviously, we have taken a great deal of time, a great deal of effort, a great deal of practice in building up these very solid identities that we have built for ourselves as, good Americans, good Theosophers, good husbands, good wives, doting children, all of the things that we call ourselves, if you were asked. Taking a lot of work, taking a lot of practice, a lot of effort. So to think that these are things that because we become exposed to a different way of seeing, we become exposed to the Theosophical Society, the Ageless Wisdom, and the body of knowledge that involves, that just that exposure is going to change things in and of itself. It doesn't. It helps, certainly. Every little bit helps. But it's only when we recognize this strong tendency that we have cultivated that we can actually do something to counteract it, if we decide that that's what we want. For many people, it's like, well, yeah, I might like it, but that's an awful lot of effort. So, my life's not too bad. I'll stick with this and just get a little bit. I'll read something now and then. And I'll sit down and I'll look at my breath when I think about it. And so, Naturally, these are the results. But it's better that. A little is better than nothing at all. That's a pure fact. So there is this aspect of a certain requirement from us. Actually, one of those three truths that speaks to this, it's actually the third of the ones that are listed. Actually, the three truths of the first one that I told you about, our soul is immortal, its future is the future of a thing whose growth and splendor has no limit. We talked about that. The second one is that the spirit which gives life dwells within us and without, is not heard, seen, or smelt, but is perceived by the person who desires perception. There is a certain quality of desire. Behind desire stands will. So that's a method of directing our attention. But the third one says each person, and again it's each man, but each person is their own absolute lawgiver, the dispenser of glory or gloom to himself. That's both liberating and it puts a lot of weight on our shoulders. Because what that would indicate is that there is a choice involved here. That there is a role that we play, or we can play at least, in this process of unfolding moving beyond the limitations of this consciousness that we inhabit, the one that brings us suffering and collateral suffering to those around us. There is that possibility. But it involves a certain type of direction of our efforts and our attention. This weekend, there's a wonderful event that took place here. It was actually in Itasca. There is a form of energy healing that developed actually out of the Theosophical Society. Some of you might have known Dora Kuntz, who was a past president here. She's been gone now she's been gone from this earth for 17, 18 years, but a remarkable woman. But what she did, she was one of these people who had a very profound sort of clairvoyance, and she ended up working a lot with doctors, and also worked a lot with spiritual healers. So they have different methods, but largely it was through, the transference of energy through what we might call laying on of hands or something like that. But in my earlier life, I had occasion to be around a lot of healers of this type. And to a person, if you were to ask them the source of this healing, how is it that you can heal like this? Every one of them would tell you, well, it's a gift from God. Is this something that could be taught? Unless you have the gift, you can't do it. You'll do something, but you can't really heal. That was the mind. Dora Kuntz, who, as I said, was this very profound clairvoyant, with their books down there that you can see, and she worked greatly with the medical community. She would observe what it was that was happening when these people were healing. And she saw that there was, in fact, a process that is innate to any human being that could be communicated, could be taught, and could be enhanced through practice. And so she started to teach this method. And around her gathered many doctors, but also around her gathered a lot of nurses. And one of those was a lady by the name of Dolores Krieger. I'm always saying it the way it's spelled. But what Dolores did was absolutely brilliant. She was a doctorate of nursing, and she taught in New York University's nursing school. And she said, I'm seeing this thing work. I know, it's very clear. But when we're talking about doing something in the medical community, it requires more than just me seeing it and giving anecdotal evidence. So what she did was she did blood testing, where, she took the blood of the people before and then after. And what was found was that there were elevations in the uptake of the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin takes in oxygen, measurable in all these cases. And so what ended up happening was you had this scientific data of occurrences within the physical body that are associated with health and healing that occur. The only thing that was different from the time she took it the first time and the time she took it after was the interaction with this therapeutic touch. And it became a form of healing that was taught then in 80 countries of the world, nursing schools around the world. But the practice is this, and it's not one that is isolated to the therapeutic touch healing community. It's one that applies across the board. Because there are three main factors that are involved. The first of them is that in order for a healer to get in touch with the healing energies requires first that we become, the language they use is centered. So there is a process of centering. We might describe it as meditation. That's language that could not be used when talking within the medical communities. Centering, that we draw in to the center, and what we find in that center is a certain level of connection that becomes possible to ever more profound levels of our being. They speak in terms of fields. The Theosophical view, they talk about the fields of consciousness. So you have the physical, the etheric, the mental, the intuitional, the will, or the Atma. So you can experience these deeper fields. And one of the things that you find, it is the nature of this universe within which we live. This universe has a certain order. We're aware of it in the laws of nature, in the various things that we call laws, that this is an ordered universe within which we live. We don't fully understand all of it. Actually, we understand very little of it. But we do know that the tendency is toward ordering. And the tendency that we call health is that ordering that is expressed as wholeness. So through centering is the first part. And then there is what's described as intentionality, that we express in this centered state our intention, which for the healer, the intention is to be an avenue through which these ordering energies of the intuitional field or of the universe can flow. So it's a state of removing the obstructions that are normal to our personality and our day-to-day living. Center, intention, and then, actually this time around, Dolores Krieger, who I had a chance to talk with at length, she's 95 years old now. Sharp as a tack. She had a chance to speak. But early in her association with this therapeutic touch, she was very much focused on grounding this thing in science so that it could be accepted more broadly. At this point in her life, she's left that to others. Countless studies have been done since. But when she speaks, now she talks about the inner workings. Science has been done. It can't be refuted. Whether it's accepted or not, it can't be dismissed. So she talks about that. So she says, in order to heal, very important thing she said, it's centering, it's intentionality, but unless there is the involvement of compassion it's not therapeutic touch. You're doing something, but you have not, there's a certain depth of connection that's lacking. So I suggest that, because again, it's not something that is specific to this particular healing method. Centering regularly so that we get the experience of what it means to be focused within, to be attentive. Our intention. You know, there is the expression that motive is everything. You know, you can do any technique that you want. You can read anything that you want, but the motive that propels that activity is everything. So our intention in this centered state, as we arrive at our intention, as we express that inwardly, that's what starts the connection. That's what initiates the flow. As a regular experience, which that's something that's up to us completely. I mean, the universe is not altered because we don't pay attention to it. It's always present, always available. But as a regular experience, it's something that has a profound effect upon us. You know, whether you describe it as a deepening, as an increased, a heightened sensitivity, as the approach of wisdom, whatever it is you call it, this profound level of connection that comes through our own choices and our own regularly expressed efforts is what's out there waiting for us. And it's the thing that can hasten us along in terms of our personal unfoldment. But really, if that's all that it's about, that's not much, quite honestly. You know, we all want to be feeling good, but if that's all that it's about, we're selling ourselves short, and we're not doing justice to the patch of ground that we occupy during these brief few years that we're here. There's much, much more, and I think we know it. Anybody who is here today, I'm not telling you something you don't know, to tell you that this is a challenging time to be present in this world today. And I don't need to paint out scenarios. Any of you who are interested or attentive have painted out your own. There are challenges which, as individuals and as a humanity, we are facing. And it's not going to go away. If anything, it's going to become more pronounced. One of the things that is our training, and one of the things that I would say is wrong in a certain way. Most of us have been raised in our scientific life with a certain expression of a theory of evolution. And I'm not going to be talking about it. We've only been here 5,000 years, so I'm not going there. This Darwinian idea of the survival of the fittest is true at the level of forms. You know, the stronger animal lives longer, survives beyond the weaker one. But the way that this idea seems to be something that we think of as a universal law is utterly incorrect in terms of human unfoldment, and that's something that we know. But I think it needs to be pointed out that the real growth, the real expansion, the real and genuine unfoldment of consciousness that we experience or that anyone experiences is not because of the survival of the strongest form. It actually occurs through our role in assisting the survival of the weakest among us. Every human being, we're hard-coded for compassion. As much as we behave in ways that tend to ignore it. A child, people lay down their lives to protect, to raise, to shelter, and to advance a child, the most helpless. The elderly, old people, people who become ill, in this false idea that we have accepted that makes no sense to service these folks, any of them. But because it is not, in fact, the nature of the way in which we truly grow, we behave in a different, very, very different manner. There's a great man. Most people probably don't even know his name, but he was really one of the spiritual giants of the 20th century and one of the greatest statesmen of the 20th century as well. He was the second Secretary General of the United Nations, a gentleman by the name of Dag Hammarskjöld. He died 1961, I think it was, plane crash, on his way to try and broker some sort of peace in the seemingly unending war in the Congo. Truly a great man. He was a man who was really a modern mystic. And, when he died, he hadn't authored any book, but when he died, they found on his table, he had kept a diary. And he had a note saying to his friend, saying that these are my writings. If you find it worth publishing, then you have my permission to do so. So it came out as a book called Markings. He says a number of things in there. One of the things that he says is this, that today, in our times, the path to holiness leads through action in the world. Not hiding in the cave on the mountaintop. The path to holiness necessarily requires activity, commitment. One of the other things he said, and I'll close with this because you all have places to go as well, and it's something that is particularly meaningful to me at this moment. He said, for all that has been, thank you. For all that is to come, yes. So I leave you with that. A lot of things up ahead, many ways that we can choose to respond. Think about the value of yes to this unknown but fast approaching moment. Yes. So thank you again for being attentive. I enjoyed myself as always.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tim. And thank you to all of you for spending a part of your evening with us. If you have questions, please raise your hand, and I'll bring you the microphone.
Well, I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for this, and I really always have gotten so much from what you've taught, and you've contributed to my spiritual practice, and I appreciate that. My question is, you mentioned being open to experience, and I wanted to ask you to speak about the relationship or the difference between being open to experience to kind of not putting ourselves and anything between ourselves and experience, but also choosing a path and being devoted and energetic in a practice, and having faith in that practice and following it through what we experience. So that,
Yeah.
thank you.
There's an expression that good judgment comes from experience, but experience comes from bad judgment. So obviously we have to be, I mean, just to say experience, I always need to be a little bit careful with that. There is this idea that's expressed by many people that obviously when we find ourselves in search of something, clearly we really can't necessarily fully formulate what that is. We know inwardly something about what it is, but we can't fully describe it. We can't. So we end up, oftentimes we end up undecided, which is a portion of, it's an aspect of this choosing a direction, the necessary sort of indecision and investigation that we must involve ourselves in. Because there's any number of just bordering from absurd to ridiculous approaches to spirituality, to harmful, out and out harmful. So, I mean, those things you want to always apply your thinking, your judgment, your analysis. But at a certain point, we arrive at something where we can say, all right, I have seen enough with this to know that there is certainly something valid here for me. When we arrive at that point, the continuation of the indecision kind of works against us. Goethe, there's a quote, a long quote, most of it's not even him, but he says, whatever you can do or dream you can do, do it. He said boldness has magic. He says boldness has magic and something else in it. Thoreau made a similar statement. The things that we point ourselves as these deeper goals, that as we find ourselves moving in that direction, aid of all different sorts finds its way to us. And so you can kind of observe that as you move along, things that you couldn't have anticipated, couldn't have expected, couldn't have called on because you didn't even know, has a way of finding its way to us and then enhancing this path that we've invested ourselves in. So this is something that, just in terms of signs along the way, oftentimes we do need encouragement. And so, these are just the sorts of things. And these are experiences as well. Experience of the way in which this inner life works. That whatever it is that we invest ourselves in, the elements and the forces of that particular consciousness find their way to us. And that's, that's kind of the way it works. Deepening it all the while.
So, no one else have a question?
Oh, no.
I'm not sure if this is on topic or if you talked about this, but we were talking about something earlier.
Right.
And I was wondering if you had any advice how we can help and make things less divisive around here in the world.
This relates to a conversation, water cooler type of conversation. And it was just something where I had this kind of sense, something I have just been observing. And again, it relates to what we talked about these couple of ways of seeing the world. One is through a somewhat fearful lens, and one is somehow being able to maintain our focus that there's something much, much deeper going on within us. But the idea was this, that most of the time when, most of the people that I tend to be hanging around with, just by virtue of my job and my position, are people who are involved in some aspect of the spiritual endeavor, search, path, whatever. But I had been observing how, given the current news cycle, it was a little bit surprising because, on 4 or 5 different occasions, just walking by and hearing the conversations that are going on among spiritual practitioners, that there was a great deal of discussion about impending possibilities of war and discussions about the various scenarios that those might actually even involve. That this might happen, that might happen. And it really did occur to me, part of what it is that we're experiencing is that there is this great investment of thought in emotion into this realm of the fearful. And for people who have some active experience of a deeper way of being, there's something that happens. I mean, anyone who has taken time to cultivate the mind and to work with their thought, your thought becomes quite concentrated and quite powerful, to the extent that if we point it in any direction, it lends a great deal of energy to that. And so the idea that, we get swept up in these things is something that particularly now we want to be a little bit more attentive about. Is this the direction that you want to invest your energy in moving forward? This thinking that seems to be grabbing people and disturbing them, or not? Because always, whether we believe it or not, you have a choice. You have people who have been in prison, the most negative of environments, with people who could care less about your spirituality or anybody else's. You have people who have been in that experience for years and years, but who somehow have come out of it ennobled even. So it's not a matter of the environment creating us. You have a choice when you become aware. So that was the thing that I thought needed some attention on our part. We can choose otherwise. Just because 1,000 people have an idea, if they don't know anything about what they're talking about, the idea is worthless.
We have a thank you from someone online.
Tell them
No
thank
question,
you. Tell
but a
them
big thank
you.
you.
For me.
Yeah, you started out talking about latent power
Yeah.
and awakening it. And how do we become aware of what that latent power is within us? And then how do we awaken it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, those latent powers are variously interpreted. They have, the obvious sorts of things people often point to are things such as telepathy, clairvoyance, healing ability. Those are obvious, sometimes perhaps even superficial. But I think we all become aware of a certain power that exceeds all of these. We talked about compassion. There is this sense of a deeper connection that necessarily occurs, person to person or heart to heart, whatever you call it, in this any compassionate action. And so you sense that there's power there. And the way that it becomes expanded and cultivated is through its repeated expression, And if you really don't fully feel it, like they say in Chicago, you fake it until you make it. Sometimes you act as if you are, and it starts to take root. Sometimes acts of kindness, even if you're not feeling particularly kind, the feedback from the one to whom it is exhibited calls something out of you. And so there's this natural sort of loop that occurs because, again, consciousness is omnipresent. And where it finds itself awakening, it necessarily affects everything around it.
So look for opportunities for acts of kindness, and that'll awaken the power within you.
That's one thing, yeah. And they're not without opportunities, even if you live alone at home with a plant. You know, you can treat that plant very kindly.
And there's somebody talking this weekend on kindness, and can you give like a sneak preview that would convince us to go?
Well, because is that happening here?
I will later.
Yeah.
Oh, well, then definitely go. But because it's not me doing it, I don't know what they're going to say. Yeah. But I'm sure it'll be something good, worth coming to, and staying after.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thanks. So going back to the answer to the last question at the end, considering the way that we're thinking about what ifs and what might happen, I'm curious about the converse of that. If you were to imagine a hopeful future and concentrate on that, I just want to know, what do you think will happen then? Is there a power in that?
Well, I think certainly there is. One of the things that we can be sure of is that just like us, anyone who is involved in these warlike expressions or the various other things going on, that just like us, you are dealing with people who are necessarily undeveloped. You know, as lofty as we may sometimes feel we are, all of us are not fully developed in terms of our capacity to be kind to one another, capacity to really see and experience what is real around us. There are limits on the ability to love and to express love, and many of these people express it in terms of violence because for whatever reason these other avenues are closed within them. So, you know, the ancient advice that it's very, very easy for us to pray for our family, our friends, and the good people of the world. Much more difficult for us to send that same sort of thought or energy to the bad ones, you know, the ones that we put into that category. You know, during my life, I've had exposure to a wide variety of people. Some of them would have been people that you might have described as worrisome at best, you know, in terms of their expression of morality or whatever. Some of them, you know, people who had criminal background and hadn't wandered far from it, but have had the experience of becoming quite aware that there is a much more profound possibility that many of them are capable of expressing, but somehow or another don't find themselves able to, but they are capable of it. Like with anything, when conditions are proper. So, yes, I mean, all those things are out there. The converse of that would be that rather than the sort of condemning that we do, that's our habit, we observe, we see, we don't try and describe it as, you know, roses and flower beds. But at the same time, the energy that we invest is toward the healing, that there is a higher reality that's not seen at this surface, that if we try to see, it enhances our ability to see. And particularly, it enhances it when we're able to see it in those who reflect it least. That's a lot of work, though. It's very demanding. But there are times when you get, there's a payback. And you know you're not wrong. Best I could do.
Great. Thank you.
I'm just going to refer to the Mahatma letters because maybe not everybody knows what they are, but the Theosophists here, many who might have heard of them. The masters say in the Mahatma letters that we don't, and this was from, I don't know which one, I believe it was Master Moya said this. He said that we don't whine about the circumstances, we do our best to fix the mess. And that's what I think you're trying to get at.
In a much less elegant way than the Mahatmas.
Well, I was kind of paraphrasing it, but I thought that was so good that I wrote it in my journal.
Oh, wonderful.
So,
Yeah. And this is another example where you see things that are outstanding in terms of what they say. If you have a journal and write it down, it's a remarkable effort. I mean, it comes back. I have one. I've told my daughter. Actually, my daughter, she's not here. She's someplace else. Used to be, she would always come to these talks. Now she's very busy. And I would always find a way, I would mention her, something about her. And invariably, after the talk was over, it'd be, Dad, why do you have to talk about me? I said, okay, I get it. And then the next time I'd do it again. And then at one time I did not do it. And after the talk, she said, Dad, you didn't mention me. So I told her, you're not here tonight. I can say whatever I want about you. But, I started talking about her, and I forgot even what I was going to say just now. But she's one who is very much, she has been involved in these sorts of things. I forgot where I was going with that, but I got a chance to mention her. Let me say this. Let me just say that.
I have a comment to make at the end.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Do you see a role for the collective unconscious, firstly, on a personal basis, to provide that direction towards wisdom? And then, if it is indeed a collective unconscious that we're all in the stream of, is there an opportunity to leverage that by awakening people more in talks like this, but in a more active sense?
Yeah, obviously something of the point for these sorts of talks is the hope that something will happen with someone who is sitting and listening. Talks can be a little bit passive, obviously. But, to a certain extent, I've been at talks where something has happened. Where you have been sitting, and it's not the words. I mean, I've had that happen on a number of occasions in the presence of the Dalai Lama, for instance. His English is not the greatest. You will hear him say compassion, compassion, compassion a bunch of times. By the time you walk away, if you were to read the script of that talk, any 8th grader with a normal vocabulary would be able to say that. But funny things happen to people when they're in the presence. I mean, I have known of people who have been in his presence and have had remarkable healings of physical conditions without anything visible even happening. So yeah, talks have their value. Even if it's just about additional information, it has its value. Ideally, what we try to draw on is, together. It happens from time to time when we're talking, that for whatever reason, however many of us there are here, there do come moments from time to time where we're very much in harmony. The words or the way that the words have been, whatever it is, these moments occur where there's a certain sort of harmony. We know when it happens. Always the telltale sign is there's some sort of sense of expansion. But when those moments do occur, these are these sorts of, these things that verge upon this deepening type of experience and connection with, you can call it the collective unconsciousness, if that one works. Some people would call it, the presence of some enlightened being, if that one works. But we know it's something. And it's something that alters us inwardly, even if just a little bit. But those sorts of things, those connections become a touchstone for us. You can always reach back, at least in memory, and know what real feels like. And so that's the thing that's happening right now. And it's happening around the world. In spite, honestly, the news that we see paints a picture, and it's disturbing in its nature. My experience, I travel around the world. And whenever I go someplace, basically I'm going to meet with or to talk to groups of people like this. People who find value and have some degree of experience in this deeper level of connection, and who are out here doing things in the world. And it used to be where these groups of people would always be out doing their thing, feeling quite isolated and alone in their work. That, of course, is changing. So really, there is quite a network. And it's not a network that is forming. It's a network that is formed of these lighted and brightened consciousnesses around the world. It's not going to make it onto the nightly news, but it's there. And it's undergirding this other process that necessarily is going on simultaneously. So again, the emphasis for me is where are you going to put your energies? Many people just give up because they don't see, what I see, they don't see. And we do need some sort of affirmation. You got that look.
One more question?
Don't let me hold folks too long now.
Okay. Last question, and then we have a comment.
Yes, so how do you envision the Theosophical Society changing as a result of your devoting full time to being international president versus juggling both roles?
Well, I think it's going to become glorious beyond measure. No, I mean, what am I going to say? What do I say, John? I think it's going to be. What I think, in all honesty, is that it's something that going to try. Going to do the very best way we know how. And again, it goes back to this whole thing of openness, that it's not, we are not in the day of the lone great head that guides all things through this one person. It doesn't work that way. I mean, basically, the whole tendency of our time is toward this networking and this cooperative endeavor that magnifies the efforts of everybody involved. So the question is, how do we accomplish that? And again, that's something that you could do it from some sort of blueprint. Maybe something like that exists. But probably it's something that occurs, my experience of it, I should say, is that it's something that occurs when we allow for it. There is a higher use of will than simply projecting and creating and manifesting. That's one level of the use of the will. It's not bad, but the higher level of the use of the will is when we actually learn that to some degree we limit its expression by personalizing it toward these limited goals, but we use the will to actually allow that which is waiting to make its appearance, to allow it to appear. And it appears as people, situations, finance, whatever it is. But it's a use of the will that's very different from what we understand. So that, to me, seems to describe the process that we're involved in, and that I hope will be something that will be more a part of what we do within the theosophical world, as it's becoming more a part of what we do in the world in general.
Tim,
Oh, Floyd.
I just wanted to say thank you for our history of your service here at the Theosophical Society in America, and yes, to our future with you as the president of the International Society. Thank you.
Coming from you, that means a great deal. Thank you. A comment. For you. You said you had a comment to make.
Oh, no, Floyd was the.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes.
Well,
Thank you, Floyd. Well said.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Well, we have a busy weekend here. Tomorrow is Crystal Bowl Sound Healing with Yolanda. And we've designed a new flyer for all you sound meditation fans that has everyone for the spring-summer season. So help yourself to flyers out there. Just to remind you, you can plan accordingly for these events. And then if you haven't had enough of being here, on Saturday we are hosting World Tai Chi Qigong Day again. It's a free event, 9 o'clock in the morning. We'll probably be inside. Weather doesn't look too promising, but we're outside if it works out. We've hosted this for several years now, and we have everybody, from 40 people to 80 people, so we never know. But join us for some practice, and then a silent practice in conjunction with a worldwide event. It's an international event. And now, to answer your question about Rabbi Rami Shapiro, yes. Next Thursday, Rabbi Rami Shapiro, an award-winning author of over 30 books on religion and spirituality, will join us. He'll be speaking on the need for perennial wisdom in today's world. He's also doing a workshop, The Sacred Art of Loving Kindness, on the following Saturday. In the little blurb, it's an interfaith interfaith day, practices he mentions from 5 different faith traditions. So if one doesn't click with you, another one might. He's a professor of religious studies, a student of the Ramakrishna order of Vedanta Hinduism, and a congregational rabbi. And he currently directs the One River Foundation for the Study of Perennial Wisdom and heads its World Wisdom Bible Project. He also writes the Roadside Assistance for the Spiritual Traveler column for Spirituality and Health magazine. So you can Google him and find out more information, but the description in the brochure and in the flyer explains a lot. We've crammed a lot in there. And then the following weekend, Pablo Sunder is returning to our campus. He'll be speaking on Thursday evening, and then on Saturday, May 13th, is a day-long White Lotus meditation retreat. We hope you can join us for any or all of these. Now I invite you to stay for refreshments and continued conversation amongst yourselves and maybe with Tim. Thank you all for coming. Good night.